Thank you all for coming to this, the Texas Talk. We're going to talk a little bit about the nature of Texas and Texas nationhood, and I'll put the bottom line up front. The case that I want to make to you all here is that Texas is a nation that fulfills every quality of nationhood in full and in every conceivable way. And I'll talk about what I mean by that as we go on. But first of all, I want to thank one group of people and one person in particular. The one person in particular that I want to thank is actually Georgia Page, who I have the honor of working with this summer. Thanks for being absent when I first gave this talk, because otherwise I wouldn't give it a second time. But it's enabled me to expand and deepen some of the subject matter there, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate your work this summer, too. Georgia's doing amazing work on the Texas Centennial. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go on in the hour. And the second group of people I want to thank are actually the interns who showed up, because you've sat through most of this already. I don't know whether I'm flattered that you came or I'm taking this as indications that you don't learn from history, but you're going to get to hear a lot of stuff over again as we go along. So is Texas a nation? This is not just an academic or a trivial question. It's actually something very fundamental to who we are and how we understand ourselves, and by extension, how we understand our work in the civic sphere. It matters a lot because if we understand that Texas is a nation in full, meeting all the attributes of nationhood, that doesn't just lead to particular policy ends, but it also leads to particular ways of being and understanding ourselves that then have second-order effects in our politics and even in our personal conduct and how we catechize and raise our own children and interact with our own communities. So this is a very fundamentally important question. I just want to really emphasize that this is not something that is a passing issue. This is something that is really foundational to who we are as a people. So we have to understand that, first of all, proceeding from the premise that Texas is a nation, we have to ask, what it is about Texas nationhood that vindicates that proposition. And when you ask individuals, pretty much anywhere, even in Texas, is Texas a country? Some people say yeah, and there was a tourist advertising slogan many years back in which the tagline was "Texas is a whole other country," and it was kind of intended kind of as a mild laugh line because, people think Texas is a country. Yeah, but come visit us anyway because it's really strange and different. And so the question arises, in what does Texas nationhood reside? Is it in the way that we dress? There are those who would say that the simple cultural folkways and sort of national costume really defines us. The cowboy hats, the boots. I remember over 15 years ago, I was in a meeting in New York City with an eminent Upper West Side publisher who I won't name here since we're recording this, but he caught sight of the fact that I had cowboy boots on, which I'm wearing now, in fact, and this is what I wear every day. We call it footwear here in Texas. And he just about leapt over his desk and accused me of only wearing cowboy boots because it was an affectation that Texas did. Apparently, I guess we wear penny loafers like Upper West Siders when we go to work in Texas ordinarily. And he simply would not believe that anybody would show up to work in cowboy boots, that it was like normal work wear, and certainly not that anybody would wear a cowboy hat. I guess Sam Pole's not in here, but I'd make fun of him if he were doing it. But in fact, those of us here who are Texan in this room, in this auditorium, understand very well that all that is the case. Is it our accent? Is it our cuisine? And what I want to say is that the answer to all these things is no. It's actually not in the way that we dress. It's not in the way that we speak. Although those are, again, signifiers of what's deeper. But what really makes us a nation is the same things that Aristotle in his Politics say makes a nation. And you can just open up to the first chapter of Aristotle's Politics. And he talks about nations being defined by two things. The rough translation is that there are people who understand one another, who have all things or most things, the important things in common, and they're united by a noble purpose. And so what he's talking about is Philia, which is affection for each other, but he's also talking about telos, which is a designated end. And so Philia, when you talk about the Philia of a people, for their neighbors, you're talking about the common values. It's a common religion, it's a common language, it's a common cultural background, but it is a sort of thing that it causes you to look at another person and see yourself in him or her. You see the community across the street, or you see the community that's on the other side of the river or the valley, and if you think that is us, that is fellow, faith X, or that is fellow language group X, or or we intermarry with them, or we have common values with them, then you have philia with these other individuals. That's what Aristotle means by this. But that in itself is not enough. Otherwise, you'd get this essentially 19th century European romantic view in which everybody who speaks the same language and has the same religion, then they belong in a country with one another, and we've seen where that leads in Europe, and so that's not sufficient. What you also need is this telos, which is the end, the proper object and the proper end of this particular community. It's the union of the philia plus the telos that makes the nation. And I wanted to say as an aside, we're not going to get into this in this talk, but that definition actually has some pretty strong implications for, I would say, American civic identity over the past 100 years. I mean, it does. Let the reader understand. You can investigate that on your own. But Texas has this, and so what I want to do is talk about how Texas was created and continues to this day with this combination of Aristotelian philia plus telos. But by the way, we don't take everything like just because it's in Aristotle. I was talking with Ariana about this earlier today. You have to modify Aristotle through preferably a Thomistic lens. But if that's not your bag, you should modify it through the lens of the past 2,000 years of Western history, which is predominantly a Christian, Judeo-Christian lens of thought. We don't take everything that Aristotle says at face value as the fundamental truth of everything. Aristotle, for example, thought that the state preceded other forms of organization and the family. Does anybody here agree with that? Because if you do, you should get out. But no, we don't agree with that. But there are things that are enduring about it, and the combination of philia plus telos actually is one of the things that we do fundamentally agree with. So to understand how Texas meets these conditions and kind of meets these criteria for nationhood, we need to go back to understand how Texas is settled. Some of you heard me talk about this, I guess, when Zach convened about 1,000 years ago, Zach. It was probably like 6 weeks ago, we had this talk on Texas Independence Day. And so I'll briefly recapitulate. It was 2 months ago? It was 2 weeks ago. Okay, yeah. Time dilates when you move fast. And so let's talk a little bit about how Texas came to be, because I think that's very important. And there's a lot of popular narrative, particularly coming from academia and the left, although I repeat myself, on what the nature of Texas settlement and Texas colonization was actually like. Texas as a land is poorly defined. I think we can acknowledge that. We actually don't really have natural frontiers in Texas. We are in so many ways a pure political community, in ways unbounded by geography that is somewhat unusual in the history of nations. So Texas, initially, when the Spanish really seriously start to not just explore it, but to settle it in the early 18th century, which we have to understand is 200 years. It's quite late in the history of the Spanish Empire in the Americas. For them, Texas is really just the territory north of what gets called the kingdom of Nueva León. So there's the it's the viceroyalty. I won't even try the Spanish. It's the viceroyalty of New Spain, and then there's constituent kingdoms within it. Nueva León is effectively, I'll oversimplify, the northernmost kingdom centered around Monterrey. And then so when you get into the Rio Grande and you get north of there, then you start to have this territory that is effectively unsettled. It's unsettled, but there's a recognition on the Spanish part that it must be contested. And it must be contested because there's a real and legitimate fear that if they don't, that the French in particular are going to come. The English aren't so much of a concern at this point, but the French are going to come down the Mississippi watershed. They already dominate the Great Lakes watershed. They're going to use the portage at what's now Chicago, and they're going to come down the Mississippi, and they're going to eventually colonize this whole vast American interior, and that's going to be the whole game. And keep in mind, this grand continental scale imperial contest is really pursued by very small numbers of people, hundreds on each side, to cover a vast continent. And so when they start to throw settlements across the Rio Grande, which they don't perceive as a border, by the way, I just want to emphasize that, you start to get this initial wave of colonization in what was initially called Las Nuevas Filipinas, not Texas. And the idea was that the Philippines, which were part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, governed from Mexico City, interestingly enough, were such a wealthy transshipment point that Texas was going to be something similar. It was an advertising ploy, basically. And so Texas was also going to be this intermediary land that was going to facilitate trade between essentially the portages and the fur trade of the predominantly French Great Lakes region with the Spanish possessions further south. And this is how you end up getting, again, I'm condensing a lot of history, this is how you end up getting the settlements in your native Nacogdoches, for example, which is, did you recall the year? Because I don't. It's 1730 something, right? Okay, well, somebody on the internet will correct me. I've forgotten the settlement of Nacogdoches, but as a South Texan, East Texas is such a blur to me. But you get the settlement of Nacogdoches in what's the old Camino Real, and you also get the settlement at San Antonio, which also takes place in the 1720s, the 1730s. And then you get a kind of a final wave, and again, this is Bourbon era, Carlos III era Spain, settling what's called Nuevo Santander, which is the modern day, essentially South Texas below the Nueces River, and so it's the Rio Grande Valley, it's Laredo, and all points in between. And this is the constellation of Spanish settlement. And then you've got, and you can drive around Texas actually and see these places today, but there's a variety of presidios that are sort of dotted around Texas. At Menard, for example, you can see the ruins of an old Spanish fort. And so there's a desire to hold the land. It's principally against, at this point, Lipan Apaches. The Comanches are present, but they're not the threat that they're going to end up becoming in the subsequent century. And this process of settlement starts to begin. I want to pause and emphasize how unfathomably violent this frontier actually was. If you go down to San Jose de los Corralitos, which is on the Texas side of the Rio Grande, it's essentially north of San Ignacio, Texas, which itself, I just said San Ignacio. I realize nobody in the room knows where that is. But it is maybe a 2 to 3 hour drive outside of the Rio Grande Valley if you follow the highway, the old military highway along the Rio Grande. And there's a blockhouse there. And the blockhouse is built in the 1750s. It's built by a family called the Vidaurris. And this Vidaurri family, very, very prominent in Nuevo Santander, by the way. There's Vidaurris who end up helming the government in Monterrey about 100 years later. So it's still there, it's still around. These are my ancestors, by the way, the people who built this blockhouse. I'm a direct descendant of them. That sounds more special than it is because everybody in the valley is a direct descendant of them. So it's sort of, it's kind of what you get when you get this sort of isolate population that stays in place for 300 years. But this blockhouse is interesting because obviously as a blockhouse, it's got very thick walls. It has like these window slits, and they're not for enjoying the view. They're actually for firing a rifle out of. And there's sort of like these little ersatz fortifications up top. And so what you could do as you settle this region, and let's say the Karankawas or the Apaches or even the Comanches after a certain point would come through and they would raid your ranch. They would try to carry off your women and children and kill you. Then everybody every night would have to go sleep in the blockhouse. And so you didn't really have the opportunity for sort of this rancho existence where you would have like a porch and a nice genteel. It was hard work. And every single night, after this initial settlement, that's where you would have to be, and you would have to be prepared for a gunfight every single night. Now, how long do you think they lived this way, right? So they built the blockhouse. Well, I know nobody knows here, but the answer is that they didn't move out of the blockhouse for half a century. Like it was not until the early 19th century that they actually were able to build a house and like live there, and the blockhouse is still there. By the way. So that's how violent it is. I mean, imagine going and building a house, I don't know, like pick your terrible neighborhood in Texas, in Austin or wherever, and just imagine that you had to fortify the place and know that in 50 years, in the year 2075, that only then would you be able to take the bars off the windows, right? Or not be armed every single second. Like that's the condition in which they lived. And so the reason I mentioned that, we'll come back to that. But Texas has to be contested from the very start. And these Spanish, not Mexican, but Spanish settlers, because if you told them they were Mexican, some of them would have said, "What's a Mexican?" And the others would have said, "No, that's crazy. I'm not from the Valley of Mexico." So these Spanish settlers who come here, those populations are still here in Texas, by the way. I'm a descendant of them. My cousin Ariana is a descendant of them. That is a continuous population, and I can talk to you separately a little bit about some of the modern day political effects of that. But we just have to understand that there's a continuous presence here with some boundings. Georgia, your native Nacogdoches does not really have a continuous population, even though you're founded by the Spanish, and there's a reason for that too, which I'll talk about. So the settlement happens, and by the time we get to the era of the Mexican War for Independence, which broadly speaking, again, I'm concatenating a lot of history, goes from about 1810 to 1821. Texas is sparsely settled, but nonetheless settled. It exists. It's a geographic concept. It's kind of a political concept, although it doesn't really have much by way of independent political existence beyond whatever attaches to identity in Nuevo Santander in particular, or being part of the Presidio at San Antonio, which we know is the Alamo at this point today. And so it comes, and then there's a turning point in Texas history. There's something called the Gutierrez-McGee expedition, which unfolds in 1812, 1813, and it's not something that a lot of Texans know a lot about, but we should. And the reason that we should is it sets the conditions for what ends up becoming the Anglo settlement of Texas a decade later. The Gutierrez-McGee expedition is a filibustering expedition. It's designed to take advantage of the chaos that's engulfing the Viceroyalty of New Spain during the War for Mexican Independence. And it's essentially an invasion that's led by an admixture of Spanish rebels and Anglo forces. And so again, this is sort of he wasn't involved in it, but this is kind of your Aaron Burr era of American adventuring and filibustering in the North American continent. And they invade and they win a series of victories. And what ends up happening is that the force makes it all the way to just outside modern San Antonio. And at a place called Medina, they have a battle. It's actually the largest battle in Texas history. You know, if some of you know this already because you've heard me give this talk before, but you know, most Texans don't know that the largest battle, the bloodiest battle in Texas history, is actually this Battle of Medina in 1813. And at the Battle of Medina, the Spanish royalist forces absolutely destroy the filibustering expedition. Like they wreck it, they scatter it, everybody's killed. And here's what the Spanish do. This is the part that is kind of the hinge of fate. They don't just destroy the rebels and scatter them, and then the status quo ante returns. The Spanish undertake a punitive approach, not just to the defeated army, but to the population in general in Texas. And there's a lot of executions, there's a lot of repression, there's a lot of clearing out of households. And the operating theory upon which they do this is that the filibustering is really a form of piracy, right? And so pirates are like the law, because there is a foundation of law behind this. Often it's misapplied, but I think we have to understand that none of this is just impulse, right? There's a system of thought behind this on the Spanish side, on the Anglo side, and so on. We'll talk about that as we go. But the law governing pirates is that they're enemies of mankind. Right, there's a Latin phrase for it. Hostis humani. You'll have to pardon me. It's been years since I took Latin, which is to say I've never taken Latin. But a pirate is an enemy of mankind, and therefore is liable effectively. And this is a concept that comes down from Roman law. Actually, it's liable to be killed by anybody who encounters them. And so, if you apply the law of piracy on land, right, because there's nothing that says it has to be necessarily maritime, then what you get essentially is a regime that looks pretty much like genocide, honestly, in sort of a broad sense. And this is what the Spanish do. And they do it because they are resource constrained. They are fighting a series of rebellions and what they consider the important part of New Spain, the important part of Mexico, which is down near the Valley of Mexico. And that war continues on until 1821 when Mexican independence is finally won. We'll skip over that. But you know, what you ought to know is that Texas is made a howling wilderness. There are settlements in Nuevo Santander that persist, many of which persist to this day, places like Laredo, places like San Ignacio, San Antonio obviously persists. Nacogdoches persists, although the quality of Nacogdoches changes a lot because it adjoins the neutral territory, along the Sabine River, and so you start to get a lot of Anglo settlement in there as well. But the rest of Texas effectively has seen really the reversal of 60 to 75 years worth of prior settlement, and this presents a strategic problem for the new Mexican nation come the decade of the 1820s, because they realize, having inherited this incredibly vast empire that extends arguably from the Pacific Northwest, Columbia River-ish, all the way down into, originally it encompassed most of Central America, actually. And so you've got this incredible heterogeneity of peoples, this stupefying geographic expanse, and they cannot hold the frontiers. In the South, this actually leads to some dissolution. The Central American republics eventually break away from, by the way, they constitute as an empire. I forgot to mention that. So Mexico achieves independence as what's called the First Mexican Empire. How's that for your revolution for liberty? Quite a difference from what the Americans end up doing. And in the North, they don't experience the same kind of immediate break with kind of the frontier provinces that they do in the South, but they realize that it's going to be an issue. And they also understand that there's a dynamism to the United States, an Anglo-American settlement there, that's going to present a serious problem. And so this is the origin of the invitation that is first extended to Moses Austin and then is carried on by his son Stephen F. Austin to start bringing families into Texas. The settlement that comes with the arrival of the Anglos in Texas is instrumentalized from the Mexican point of view in order to provide a buffer population. Now, again, we have to understand that there is a long history of this, particularly in the European context of settling individuals in a military frontier. That's really what they conceived of doing. There's an area in Croatia called the Krajina. It's the military frontier. It's literally the border. So they're taking from this Habsburg experience in Eastern Europe, and they're taking from kind of Scottish borders and English plantation. And so this is just a thing that's done. It's not something that's particularly unusual that you're going to import a population. We'll give you land, but you have to fight and defend it, and you're going to be the buffer between us and the other people. But what's the flaw in this argument? You can't have as your buffer the same people that you're defending against on the other side of the buffer. Like, that doesn't work. Like, if I'm going to create a barrier against like the Picts and I'm in Roman Britain, I'm not going to import Picts to settle the military frontier. But the Mexicans do this. One of many things they didn't think all the way through. But this is what they do. They import the Anglos. And what's interesting is that as it comes, this is the germ. This is the nucleus of the Texan nation. We have to understand this. I'm, as many of you know, I'm very proudly South Texan. I'm proud to be half Tejano, half Anglo. And my Anglo side actually does not go back to the settlement of Texas. It goes back to after the Civil War when a lot of defeated Alabamians came into East Texas. But I will say this: it is unquestionable, that the Anglo-Texans of the 1820s and 1830s are the core and the nucleus of the Texas nation, constitutive of the rest, without whom Texas would not exist as a nation. Period, full stop. We have to understand that. We have to know that we owe all of our existence to them and the political ideas that they bring with them. One of which is this idea of terra nullius, which is effectively no man's land. A terra nullius is something that belongs to nobody. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not under the formal sovereignty of another state. That's not what it signifies. But it's a concept that's used to denote, and there are terra nulliuses in existence today, by the way. They're usually formally recognized. But it's a concept that denotes essentially unused territory. It is unsettled. It doesn't mean empty, by the way, but it means unused from a perspective of essentially a particular type of civilization that understands and adheres to a politics in the Aristotelian sense. So if you have barbarian nomads that are wandering an area, that could still be terra nullius because there's no state formation. There's no Philia, there's no telos that attaches to that type of settlement. In 1765, Blackstone is actually writing at this point, and this is after a couple centuries of experience of settling the Americas. He's writing about this idea that to arrive on a land, to form a political community and to improve it, confers ownership and confers possession and confers nationhood in ways that otherwise don't necessarily exist and actually do not require the act of a preceding formal sovereign to validate. By the way, this is an idea that actually was current, a century later in American law with the Homestead Act of 1862. To take possession of land given in the American West by the Homestead Act, you had to live on it for 7 years and improve it. And if you didn't do those things, you didn't own it. But if you did do those things, you did own it, specifically because you have transformed terra nullius into a part of the polity, right? And so this is what the Anglo-Texans do. And as they arrive, they don't replace. I want to hit back at some of the left's mythos on Texas history. They don't replace or push out the remnants of or the persistent elements of what became Tejano or Mexican or really Spanish settlement in Texas. What they end up doing is creating kind of a synthesis with it, and I don't mean it's a perfect admixture. We're not talking about the Dutch at the Cape, right? I mean, we are talking about communities that existed fundamentally separately, and yet, interestingly enough, we're able to find telos, if not Philia, a lot, especially in the decades of the 1820s and the 1830s, and so on. And so, as they get here and they get to Texas on this frontier, which is extremely hostile, very violent, charged with its defense, its settlement, and its development, it is almost the perfect cauldron for nationhood. And furthermore, it is a population among the Anglo-Texans that remembers vividly what it was like to create a nation, because the American Revolution from which they came was only a generation prior. So they know what this process looks like. They understand where they are, and they know that they're standing in a particular tradition that's going to lead them to a particular end. And this does not mean that they arrived with the intent of creating a new nation, because they certainly expected to come and subsist and live under the Mexican Constitution of 1824, which was a Federalist Constitution and guaranteed liberties, and was something that was very, recognizable and consonant with what they understood as ordered law in their experience. What they didn't know, and what they came to realize too late until nothing but a revolution was an option for them, was what Alexis de Tocqueville a decade later identified as the fundamental flaw in what he calls the Spanish republics. And de Tocqueville talks about this. This is a very small passage in de Tocqueville's work. I think it's in volume 2 of Democracy in America. But he essentially says that the Spanish republics doomed themselves I'm paraphrasing here, but doomed themselves essentially to tumult unto generations, because as their opening act, they elect to graft upon themselves Anglo-American structures and apparatuses of ordered governance that are not organic to them. Something that's organic to them would be something like the aristocratic Spanish structure to which they were accustomed. I don't say this as denigration, by the way. One's not better than the other. But the question is, what's organic, what's suited, what's likely to take root, and what's unlikely to take root. And unfortunately, I think this is still true to a huge extent 200 years later. What's unlikely to take root is the forms and the mechanisms of Anglo-American governance and constitutionalism. Come talk to me about my opinions on Mexican governance today in 2025, which is my policy area, and I'll tell you a lot more about that. It'll cure your insomnia on that. So what ends up happening, essentially, again, to fast forward, to speed run through a lot of the history here, is that the Mexicans, I was going to say they can't do it. That's not fair to say. They don't do it. Whether they can do it or not, history is contingent. Maybe someday they will. But they don't do it. They don't maintain the constitutional liberty which the Anglo settlers of Texas originally expected. There is a canard on the left to the extent that the cause of the Texas Revolution was slavery. It's not true. There's simply no primary evidence that there was even a minor cause, to say nothing of a principal one, of the Texas Revolution. And in fact, when you look at Mexican history, there's the Mexican nationalists like to make great hay over an 1829 Guerrero decree, which supposedly outlaws slavery in Mexico. But when you look at the fine print, this decree to outlaw slavery, it does so throughout Mexico, except for two places: the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, where most of the slaves were, and also Texas too. So there wasn't really that conflict incipient. What generates the conflict and what really affirms that Texas is a nation is the loss of self-governance. Period. Full stop. It's no accident that the Texas Revolution starts for almost exactly, and I mean the proximate cause, I don't mean the underlying cause, but the proximate cause of the Texas Revolution is almost exactly the same as the spark that lights the American Revolution. It's an attempt by the central government to seize arms from a particular town. Now, in the American Revolution, April 1775, it's the attempt to seize the armory, at Concord, which leads to the fights at Lexington, and then Concord, and then the North Bridge. And in October 1835 in Texas, it's the attempt to take back this small cannon that's been loaned to a particular community for defense against Indian raids at the town of Gonzales. And the townsmen of Gonzales, they come out, they're willing to fight. They know the cannon belongs to the Mexicans, but they also understand with accuracy that the reason that they're being asked to surrender it is specifically to deprive them of the ability to defend themselves, which is essential and intrinsic to the ability to live in law-governed liberty. They don't understand freedom. They don't understand liberty without the right to defend yourself. without self-defense. We must understand that the two are one and the same. It's probably a majoritarian opinion in America today, but not everybody agrees with it. But we should understand that that is a continuous tradition for us. And so what they do is they fight the Mexicans who were there, and they raise this flag, the legend goes. And what does it say on the flag? Does anybody remember? Oh my gosh. Are you the only one who knows in the entire... Go ahead, please. No, it's the Alamo flag. Go ahead, Georgia. It's the come and take it flag. Very good. Yeah, thank you very much. Shame on you, by the way. Yeah, sorry. Yes, but the 1824 is the Alamo flag, which refers to the Constitution for which they were fighting, because the Alamo defenders were not aware that independence had been declared when the siege began. So, great point. So I'll leverage off of that. But yeah, it says come and take it. What's that a reference to, by the way? Is it just a fun? I already know you know the answer to the question. I'm sorry. I just assume that I know that you know. Sorry, Austin, go ahead.
You just shamed me for not saying come and take it. So.
No. I let that shame come from within yourself. What does it mean? Were you raising your hand, Marie? No. What is it from? It does refer to the canon, but what's the phrase from? Go ahead.
It's something classical. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I think you could have gotten that from context clues. Okay. Last guess. Caroline, go ahead. No. Okay. All right. So, what is it, Austin? Tell us. Yes. Which is what?
Which is the king of Sparta's response to the Persians when they demand Sparta surrender. He says, "If you want this land, Molamlape, come and seize it."
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. They saw themselves, so I know since we're recording this, I have to repeat this into the microphone. It is a reference to the Spartan answer to the Persians that precipitates the Battle of Thermopylae. Come and take it. Come and take our arms. Come and get it. If you want it, come and get it, because we are going to fight. We're going to fight for our freedom. And so think about that. Think about what it means that these frontiersmen who are out on the farthest settled reaches of North America, and they're there in a town where they can't Instagram this, they can't show it to anybody else, but immediately they say, oh, this is just like the Spartans at Thermopylae. That is indicative of how well catechized these people were from a civic perspective, that they understood themselves to stand in a specifically classical tradition of liberty that goes back, in the near term to Locke and the Glorious Revolution, 1689, but then more fundamentally goes back to Roman republicanism and its roots in Greek ideas of liberty. I'll call on you first next time. I'm sorry, we should short circuit the process. You all, in seriousness, all of you as Texans here, and even the Louisianans, like need to know this. That it is not something that although the Texas Revolution arises organically, the soil has to be prepared long before. John Adams has a letter from later in his life in which he talks about the fact of the revolution, the American Revolution, having been accomplished in the hearts of the people long before the first shot is fired. That's a paraphrase. It's not a direct quote. But the revolution and the idea of American independence and the idea that we will fight for our rights has to take root long before anybody picks up a rifle and defies the British. And it's the same with the Texans. The Texans had to see the example of the American Revolution. They are the sons and daughters of it. Although I will say that if you go to the Texas state capitol and you exit through the north exit, look at the bronze plaque that's between the doors. It is a list of veterans of the American Revolution who are buried in Texas, some of whom actually fought in both revolutions. There's one that we know for sure was an NCO in the North Carolina line in the Continental Army under George Washington. And then later in life, ended up fighting in the Siege of Bear in late 1835 for Texas independence as well. Can you imagine that lifetime, a lifetime that encompasses both revolutions? What a blessing, to borrow Dickens' phrase, to be alive in that dawn. Truly incredible. And so what we see in the Texas Revolution then is Texas arising as a nation. It's already been accomplished as a nation. This is what I want to get to. Texas has already been accomplished as a nation before the revolution starts, and it arises not in any sense that people woke up one day and said, okay, we're gonna make a nation. Like, hey, we're a country now. Guess what? Like, I feel enough Philia for you that we're just gonna like. Can you feel the Philia between us? I think we have a telos, you and I. They don't say that, but they don't have to, because it's organic, it's understood, and it's understood because it's understood when Gonzales, this town of Gonzales, defies the state, defies the Mexican autocracy. all of the other communities which it feels Philia and shares a telos rise up and constitute an army to fight for the defense first of rights and then for the Declaration of Independence and the achievement of independence versus the Mexicans. And so when we look at the Texas Declaration of Independence, understand that we're looking at something that has already been achieved. Texas is already a nation. And it's a good document. I know several of you have read this because we do an annual reading of the Texas Declaration of Independence. Who's not read it? I'm just curious. I'm not going to shame you for this. You've not read it, you've not read it, you've not. Okay, only one of you has an excuse because you're not from here. The rest of you, oh, you're not, neither of you are from here? Where are you from? Oh, that's right, I forgot about that. You're the Midwestern spy. Who are you from? You're from New Mexico? Well, that's Texas. No, I'm just kidding, that's fine. I wish. Yeah, we tried twice. I'll talk to you later. So yeah, but you should read the Texas Declaration. If you haven't read it, you should read it. The formulation. So the formulation of the American Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and what is it? The pursuit of happiness. What is it in the Texas Declaration? It's life, liberty, and anyone remember? It's property. Why did they say life, liberty, and property? Does anybody know? Go ahead. You have the right answer. It's Locke. Yeah, it's Locke. It's Locke's formulation. Again, this is the civic catechism that they all know. These rude frontier farmers, they all know. They're referring to Locke. And so we get this, and what it means is that Texas has all the ingredients. Again, it takes a particular cultural background. It takes this philia, it takes this telos, the shared sentiment of commonality, the seeing ourselves and our neighbor, plus a common and noble purpose, as Aristotle said. But there's an added element, which is that the Tejanos of Texas, a large number of them, Juan Seguin, Navarro, de Zavala, there's a lot of Tejanos who join in actually with this revolution. And it's not because, I want to be clear, it's not because they have suddenly become converted to Anglo-American liberty. That's not the case. They retain their organic cultures of origin, but they too have ideas of liberty. I want to emphasize this. Spain, in general, does not get the credit that it deserves, in my opinion, on a lot of different fronts, actually. But one of the areas in which Spain doesn't get the credit that it deserves is that prior to the English suddenly deciding that they shouldn't behead each other at the drop of a hat, for 200 years prior to that, Spain had a well-developed Catholic tradition of humanism. And that's why it's the Spanish, not the English, who have a series of debates at Salamanca and elsewhere about how to treat the Indian populations, what the just telos and end is of empire building in the Americas, and so on. And so you actually get this very admirable Spanish tradition to which the Tejanos of the Texas Revolutionary era are heir to, and which they're conscious of as well. And there's an awareness that things have gone bad. And it doesn't just happen in Texas. In this era, you get a series of rebellions against central authority in Zacatecas, in Coahuila. There's a brief Republic of the Rio Grande that's centered upon Nuevo Santander and with the capital at Laredo, which you can still visit, actually. It's a very interesting museum there. In the Yucatan, for example. And what ends up happening, of course, is that Mexico reconquers them all with the exception of Texas itself. So we have to see it in that tradition. So you've got these two peoples that arrive at a decision point to fight for liberty through completely different pathways. But of course, in history, in the contingency of history, circumstances everything. And so they proceed forward. And so they both become part of this nation and discover amongst themselves a common telos. Common philia takes a little while longer. I would argue that really doesn't emerge until the 20th century. There's a very interesting historical pathway on that too. But it is enough for our purposes that they're both in for this Texas nationhood, and they're both constituted of it. So the nation is in the making, and with the revolution, Texas comes to the fore. Texas becomes itself. And so the question arises: is this something more than a historical moment? Is Texas nationhood a flash in the pan of the 1820s, 1830s, maybe the 1840s, that then subsides, and then with the great tragedy of Texas history, which is that we become a state in December 1845, does that end the story? And the answer is no. And the reason it's no, I know I'm time limited here, so we'll get to Q&A quicker than you think, believe me. But the reason that it's no is that warfare continues in Texas for almost another 100 years. This is a historical understanding that I think gets missed in a lot of the popular narrative. This is idea that Texans, we fight at the Alamo, we win at San Jacinto, And then there's sort of, there's rangers on the frontier, and they got to go catch bandits and, fight Indians. But other than that, Texas is fine. It's completely untrue. Texas is a cockpit and an arena for warfare for almost a full 100 years after the Revolution, which is not commonly understood. In the 1840s, the Mexicans reinvade Texas. How many of you knew that, by the way? Did you know the Mexicans reinvaded Texas? And I know you know Austin. I'm sorry. Austin Prochko, just for the record, for those watching on the internet, does know all of this, probably better than I do. In fact, no, that's fine. I'll give you credit for it. But if you know that, so it's true, actually. So the Mexicans in the 1840s, actually, they wage a naval war against Texas, which Texas largely wins. And there's not one, but two invasions of Texas, one of which actually reoccupies San Antonio and the Alamo. And so there are real and serious threats to Texas independence in the 1840s. This is what eventually drives the bankruptcy of the Texas Republic. Mirabeau Lamar spending all the money also helped bankrupt the Republic. And then leads to Texas essentially having to join the United States, essentially as an act of national survival. I don't mean the American nation, I mean the Texas nation, an act of national survival. But it's very interesting that when you see the Texas, I was almost going to say the Texas-Mexican War of 1846. How's that for solipsistic? The U.S.-Mexican War of 1846, 1848. When it unfolds, you see the Texans effectively acting as an independent force attached to the army of Zachary Taylor. They don't take the Texas and Winfield Scott's expedition. That would have been a disaster. But they're attached. They help capture Monterey, and eventually a lot of the Texans are sent home because they approach the Mexicans with an exterminating fury that is not conducive to long-term occupation of northern Mexico. I'll tell you what. So that sentiment persists. That's the 1840s. In the 1850s, Texas is a scene of terrific violence, to a certain extent from Mexican depredations, but really from the Comanche threat at this point, to a secondary extent the Apache. In the decade prior to the Civil War, the bulk of the United States regular army is deployed in Texas. This is why when you see the Civil War pop off, you see a lot of officers, both northern and southern, coming out of Texas to go to the respective posts from which to actually fight the Civil War. And it's because Texas had that uniquely violent frontier, and especially when setting that against like the plain Indian experience. I mean, that's saying a lot, that you had to deploy the bulk of the regular army in Texas. In the 1860s, of course, the Civil War happens. Texas, to our New Mexican friends, Texas attempts briefly to pursue an independent foreign policy during the 1860s, tries to conquer New Mexico. We would have won except for the Coloradans intervening on New Mexican side, but so be it. There's always the third try, so we'll give it some time. In the last half of the 19th century, you have a series of conflicts: the Las Cuevas War, the San Elizario Salt War, a lot of bandit activity. That what it does is it keeps in being two things. One is institutional, which is obviously the institution of the Texas Rangers, which becomes a gendarme that effectively has no equal anywhere in the United States, a true local armed force. But also keeps alive this understanding in the minds of Texans that they're still out there, we're still out there on the frontier, and that we still have to fight for who we are and what we mean. And that's something that the rest of the United States really isn't subjected to, and so it keeps alive this idea of Texas independence. And then, so did I say Texas independence? I meant Texas nationhood. Sorry, I'm letting my inner voice take over what should be said. And then in the era of 1910, 1920, when the Mexican Revolution unfolds, and tremendous violence actually comes into Texas soil, and there's actually a series of incursions into Texas at places like San Ignacio and elsewhere, in which Mexican forces actually cross into Texas and have battles with the United States Army, with local Texan forces. In 1915, the Carrancistas down in Mexico actually incept a plan called the Plan de San Diego to incite a guerrilla war in South Texas to reclaim at least South Texas, at least Old Nuevo Santander, from Mexico. So there's a territorial irredentism that's still present. And the way they want to do it is they want to start a race war and essentially commit genocide against the Anglos. And so the Texas Rangers respond to this in an excessively sanguinary fashion, I would say. It leads to war crimes at, for example, the town of Porvenir, which no longer exists, in which apparently the Rangers and the U.S. Army executed the male population of a Texas town that was populated with probably U.S. citizen Mexican Americans in 1918. And this violence doesn't fade until the early 1920s. And so because of this, because of this tradition of violence and this realization that from the first shots at Gonzales in October 1835, for a century until the early 1920s, that somewhere somebody had to fight for Texas to exist, Texas retains its sense of nationhood in ways that no other state does. The combination of Philia and telos persists for all of us. And so when we get to the Texas Centennial in 1936, which Georgia is writing her research paper on, this is the context in which it takes place. In 1936, Texas celebrates 100 years of independence, dating from March 2nd, 1836. And it does so understanding that every adult alive remembers the days when Texas had to be fought for. The only people who do not have a recollection of that are the children. Just think about that. Understand that it's not just it's not just a date on the calendar. It's something real. It's something that people live through. There are people alive today, including my grandmother, who's 96. She attended the Centennial celebrations in Dallas. There are folks alive today who remember this, and because they remember it, they're very elderly, but because they remember it, they also remember talking to individuals who were part of that fight. They also remember talking to individuals who fought for Texas Revolution. History is not as far away as we think. Right now, we can go find some of the elderly folks, who are mostly in their 90s, who knew Civil War veterans. We can go find folks who knew individuals who fought the Mexicans on the border, who fought the Indians on the frontier in Texas. And so that persistence of memory, that persistence of our understanding of ourselves continues to mark Texas today. So I'll close with this. Are we still a nation? We're coming up on the bicentennial now. 1936 was 90-ish, it'll be 90 years ago next year. And have we lost that sense of nation? Have we lost the Philia and the telos? And you can make the doomer argument that, yeah, we have, because we haven't had to fight for it. We haven't had the violence. The United States takes care of everything. And there's some purchase in that, by the way. We are subject to the same societal strains and the same stresses that the rest of the country is subject to. We are a nation within the United States, but we do not exist apart from it. But I would argue this: we haven't lost our nationhood, not yet. Here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, last January we put out our Texas Identity Project, in which we actually went and surveyed and talked to 4 groups of Texans: African American Texans, New Texans, South Asian Texans, which is a huge population of South Asian Texans that's arisen in the past 20 years, and then Mexican American Texans as well. And you know what the number one unifying symbol among them all was? It's the Alamo. It's the Alamo. There's an understanding about what the Alamo means. You know what the number one group is that felt affinity for the Alamo? South Asian Texans. What do they have to do with the Alamo? Well, I'll tell you what. They understand the Philia and the telos behind the Alamo. The group that liked it the second most is Mexican American Texans, because man, we love a lost fight, and that ought to give us hope. The charge for us, really, is whether all of you in the room, everybody's young to me now, except for me. Like me and Tom are like the oldest people imaginable here. So combined, our ages are about 215. And but for those of you who are younger, I would just say this: the question of whether Texas is going to be a nation or not, going into our 3rd century, we're about to complete our 2nd, going into our 3rd century after 2036. The question of whether nationhood continues is up to you, and it is up to you on the same basis on which the people of Gonzales raised the flag with a reference to Spartans at Thermopylae, understanding themselves to stand in a tradition of liberty that ran from Roman republicans through Locke, through the American Revolution, to themselves. And it's this: it's catechism. It's catechism and education. In the Northwest Ordinance, 1787, which precedes the Constitution, the Congress of the Confederation understood that it was necessary to set aside land within the Northwest Territory for public education. They didn't do it as a concession to the teachers' union. They did it because they understood that Republicans, small R Republicans, had to be formed. They had to be catechized. You have to be taught. You have to be taught to live in liberty. It's a taught skill. It's not something you're born to. You're born with the image of God. You're not born with the ability to live in liberty, which, as Pope John Paul II said, is not the freedom to do as you will, but it's the ability to do as you ought. And that must be taught. And it is no accident, that line from 1787 to the Texas Declaration of Independence in 1836, which affirms that one of the reasons that the Texans are rebelling and declaring independence from the Mexican regime is that the Mexicans failed to establish a system of public education, because they understood that without that, it is not possible to live in liberty. And so it falls to us now to make sure that our children and one another are fully catechized, because the fate of the nation depends upon it. Who we are depends upon what we teach, not just ourselves, but those around us, the community that we have. So when March 2nd comes around, make sure you read the Texas Declaration of Independence. with your family, with your coworkers, with your community. Make sure you know Texas history. Read the basic texts. If nothing else, read Fehrenbach's Lone Star. Make sure you know it. And make sure that you never forget that our nationhood and our identity is more than the boots we wear. It's more than how big Texas is. It's more than our regional particularities. All that could go away tomorrow. God forbid, but it could go away tomorrow. But Texas will stay alive if we understand ourselves not just as inheritors of the Texas history and heritage that came before us, but as individuals who must work every day to deserve it. And that's it. Thank you very much. And now, thank you. Poor George has had to sit through all this. We do have mics, so if anybody wants to ask questions, feel free. I'll take any questions, except on my favorite cars, but go ahead. Go ahead, Austin.
So the only reason I know much about Texas history at all is I had to teach it. And so I know facts about Texas history bereft of context, which you richly provide. Have you ever considered writing a textbook for 7th graders on Texas history?
I have never actively considered associating with 7th graders, even when I was in 7th grade.
You're gonna have some soon. So.
Well, yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, not me personally. You know, the standard. I mentioned T.R. Fehrenbach's Lone Star, which is written. It comes out in 1969, and there still hasn't been a good successor to that one-volume history of Texas. Somebody, I don't know if it's me. I'm just a guy. But somebody should write a follow-up good one-volume history of Texas. But honestly, I'll just be very candid with you. It's probably going to be somebody from outside the academy, because the Texas Academy has done a terrible job, with a few limited exceptions, but a terrible job of nurturing and fostering a class of historians and a class of people who will tell the Texas story with empathy and frankly love for their nation. So
the textbooks I've used suck. So.
Textbooks. There's a lot to be desired. Yeah. Ariana, go ahead. And then you're next. Go ahead.
So one of the things the thing that you mentioned that makes Texas a nation is Philia and the telos.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm wondering is, with Texas's expanding population that we have right now, expanding more than it has before, both from people from other states and other countries, how do you maintain that and maintain Texas' status as a nation?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the answer is at the end, right? It really isn't catechism. Like you have to teach it, and you have to insist upon it. You have to insist upon the integration of yourself. I mean, it's not. So I want to be clear. Like, this is an argument against like racial diversity or something like that. That would be to misunderstand what's going on. But you have to insist upon the catechizing. You have to insist upon, and you know, I was going to say the mythos. A myth is not something that's untrue, by the way. You know, a mythos is narrative that illuminates the truth, properly understood. And so you have to, in that sense, you have to insist upon a mythos of Texas that affirms what does the Alamo mean, what does independence mean, what does Texanness mean, and I think we can do that, but we have to consciously choose to do it. So that's the only way forward. The alternative is balkanization, and there we are. Yeah. Go ahead. You're next.
Josh, thank you. Obviously, everything that you put in here at the end, this urgency that you've given to all of us, what is it precisely that you think TPPF has to do in the role of catechism, insisting upon education, insisting that the nationhood must be taught to not only those who are relocating here, but of course later generations, as you mentioned, this 3rd century, which Texas will enter itself into very soon. What is the role of TPPF specifically in making this Texan nationhood persist?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where we work and live, has a vital role to play in it. And I would highlight probably the number one thing that we've done is the work that Dr. Lindsay and Courtney Bagley, who's not here with us, have done for a long time, which is make sure that our curriculum, both in K-12 and higher education, and the things that we emphasize do constitute that catechizing in the small R Republican tradition. That I would say that is our principal contribution, and frankly, the school choice victory, the education freedom victory of the past legislative session has been a major blow to that end, because now parents, Texan parents, the majority of them want this kind of education because they want their children to understand who they are and where they're from. All that's going to advance forward. I would say on pulling the camera back, though, pulling it back from specific policies, the existence of this foundation is an argument that policy within Texas matters, and it matters for its own sake. And frankly, if you've worked in liberty institutions in other states, that's not a common view in some other places. Most of the states, and I say this with regret, this is not a disparagement of the other 49 states, see themselves as predominantly geographic expressions, which you can exchange at will. And TPPF has never believed in that. We believe that Texas governance matters for its own sake, certainly as a model to the other states. But even if that model didn't exist, we would nonetheless pursue it because we understand that Texas has an independent existence. I don't mean sovereign independence, but you understand what I'm saying. Like it has an independent existence that has meaning within itself and purpose within itself and must be pursued for itself. So go ahead, Marie.
How reasonable do you think the argument is for Texas secession, and do you think it's likely?
This is going to be posted on YouTube, right? Yeah. I will say this: look, anybody advocating for Texas secession should be ignored in full candor. One of the marks of a good politics. I don't mean partisanship, but good politics is whether it's prudent. Right? I mean, we can all determine, what we wish would happen. I wish Texas was an empire that stretched from Venezuela to Alaska, but it is not prudent to pursue that. Arguments for Texas secession and independence fall in that same vein for me. What is fruitful for us to focus on is sovereignty under the ambit of the 10th Amendment, which this foundation has done for years, and there is a lot of territory to be covered within that, and that's the proper object of our focus. Thanks for putting me on the spot, though. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, you guys have been incredibly gracious, spending an hour of your time. Thank you. Thank you for those watching online, and we appreciate it. Go forth and do great work for Texas. Thanks.